ahead and introduce myself. I'm Richard. Some of you may be familiar with me, some of you may not. If you like coming to the farmer's market and you like coming to the classes, by the end of this year you'll see me 3 more times. Does everybody have one of the landscaping with natives handouts? They come in white and yellow. If you don't, I got some more up here I can take and give out for everybody. This presentation has a lot of information, dense slides in it. I'm going to go through and just talk about them. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask them. I don't mind answering. I love answering questions. It's what I do most of my days. I do tend to be a little bit tangent inducing, so I'll go off on a wild hair every once in a while. So if you see me getting too far afield, just reel me back in. If you can't hear me, just raise your hand. I'll start talking louder. I can boom pretty well. I just prefer not to. And yeah, so we'll get started. I'm talking to y'all today about native plants here in Tennessee. We have an absolute ridiculous number of native plants here. That's mostly because Tennessee's got an absolutely ridiculous number of different potential biomes. And we run through a really wide gamut of temperatures and seasons throughout the year. From being hot and dry, to cold and wet, everything in between. I constantly joke out in the nursery that we can grow everything you want to in Tennessee and kill half of it that same year. So we're pretty good at making new plants. Now with natives, they're really awesome. We'll see if this clicker will actually work with me today. We're going to cheat. There we go. So lots of native plants in Tennessee. Just up here we have a pretty fair smattering and a whole bunch of different really cool ones. Over here in the top left corner we got Indian pink. That's a beautiful little plant. Bottle brush buckeye. So, we're getting too far afield. There we go. Junipers, Venestamon, lots of different ones of these here in Tennessee. All of them have really pretty flowers. Got lots of really awesome shrubs. All the plants you'd ever want to try and find for the yard, and they'll do things for you in all seasons. So what are native plants? Native plants have 2 good definitions. Definition 1 is a plant that is endemic to our area. It occurs here, it has been here for a very long span through what is known as geologic time. That means that if you are looking at the complete history of Middle Tennessee, they've been here since the Ice Age or longer, so a very long span. Natives are generally defined as plants that were here before European settlement. Unfortunately, we brought a lot of stuff in, so some things we don't know if it was here before us or not. So you have to be really careful with those. That's where the definition of native gets a little bit loose. But anything that's been here for a really long time, it's a native plant. So why should you care about natives? Specialization. These plants are specifically engineered by nature to live here in Middle Tennessee. They will handle everything our environment and climate will take and throw at them. Food web, they host an infinite amount of different food options for many different species. They form the basis for a lot of different things. Plants are what bugs eat, bugs are what birds eat and what reptiles eat, and then everything else eats the little birds and the reptiles, including the little mice, field mice, and everything that establishes the food web. So it all starts with your plant material. And it just builds from the ground up. The more natives we have, the more endemic species of insects, the more endemic species of everything else. Then biodiversity. A little bit of a hot button word for some folks, but essentially it means having a lot of different things in one area. It does not mean having 500 acres of knockout roses all in one place. It means having a big, wide swath of all sorts of different plants in through there. Good picture here, swallowtail butterfly. This is on a spice bush, really nice little plant. You don't see it around here a lot anymore because we've managed to take and knock over a lot of the ground around here. Currently in Tennessee, there's 530 species of endangered, threatened, or near threatened species of native plants. So benefits of landscaping with natives. They're naturally adapted to withstand Tennessee environmental conditions like I already went over. They're low to lower maintenance. A lot of them are very drought tolerant plants just because of the way our weather runs out here. They're very beneficial to our native wildlife. Excuse me. And they don't get hit by a lot of pests like a lot of people would think. A lot of our pest insects hit non-native plants. And they cause a lot of trouble with those. Spider mites generally aren't a big problem on a lot of native plants like there are on non-native shrubs. There's some aphids that are native here, but a lot of the bugs that get on native plants, they're usually much larger and easier to see and find and treat. Before we got started, we were talking about milkweed bugs. Those guys are sometimes as fat as the nail on your pinky finger, and it's really easy to spot them and pick them off or crush them off or pick them off with tape. That way you get a whole bunch of them in one go. They can make for really beautiful little woodland scenes, all your native plants. And then I can't stress the low and lower maintenance part enough. Once you get these guys in the ground and they get started, they are really easy to maintain as long as your soil is even remotely okay. And that's even remotely okay for Middle Tennessee, where we generally have concrete for soil. So where do we live? We live here in the central basin of Tennessee. It's formed by the collapse of the Nashville Dome. So in the mid-center of Tennessee, there used to be a giant upwell of rock, like a big old mountain. That's where a lot of ours comes from. It is right here in this middle part where it's yellow. That's the inner basin, and then you have the outer basin. We live right in the center there. There's lots of stuff that you'll find just right here. That whole basin system is the reason why the Tennessee River circles around Tennessee the way it does. Two sections. So on the outer sections, we have oak Hickory Forest. In the intersections, we have what's known as Cedar Glades. I'll cover those more here in a minute. But even just here, we've got a pretty wide array of things. And within just a few miles, we've got an even larger array of different plant species. Characteristics, inner basin's usually relatively flat. The outer basin, you start touching up the highland rims. You've got more hills, more valleys, more places for water to take and accrue, so you get a little bit richer soil. Okay, so then there's Cedar Glades. Now these things are really, really cool, mostly because they're only found in the inner basin of Tennessee. They are characterized by red cedar. Everyone's familiar with red cedar. They're good little plants. I like them. They're strong, they're tough, they're hard to kill. Takes a nice heavy drought to knock them out. Either that or someone coming through with a chainsaw about every single year for several years. Because you almost can't cut them out sometimes. These cedar glades, they're exposed limestone outcroppings. They usually have a thin layer of soil over top of them. They'll flood in the spring and over the course of the winter. They'll dry out hard as concrete during the course of the summer. And in between, you'll have all sorts of different flowers that you won't find anywhere else in Tennessee or the world that'll grow in there. Pretty good little picture of what everybody looks like. So over here on the left, we've got a cedar glade in early June, so right after all the nice spring rain, there's still plenty of water in there. And then in winter, it'll take and die back real hard, and you'll have a lot of the same things over the course of the summer too, where it'll be this dry looking landscape with little spots of color here and there where stuff grows in. Our native coneflower Echinacea tennescensis. It grows here and pretty much specifically here and then in small areas around it. It's a nice little flower. There should be a picture of it later on the slides. Again, rocky soils, lots of cedar. You'll have some elm in there every once in a while, lots of scrub brush. Who here knew that we had a prickly pear native to Tennessee? Anybody? Yeah. You'll find them in areas like this because this is where they'll grow. So if you ever want to have a cactus that you don't have to worry about, see if someone's got a prickly pear patch from our native on their property, you can take just one of the fans. Yes, ma'am.
What prevents the cedars from filling in the middle there? Is it just too rocky?
Yeah, too rocky, too much shallow stone, and just a lot of slabs. Where the trees start growing in is where you'll find fissures in the rock. So it's in spots where the bedrock has opened up enough where they can get down in there. And then once they find a hole, they can over time keep opening that up because roots are really good about making ways for themselves. So once you get one tree in there, you'll get more trees in there, and then they'll start breaking up that whole section of ground. Cedar and most junipers, because that's what cedar is, it'll take and throw down very deep roots that's really good about finding moisture. That's why they're so tough, because they've got a big root system underneath them that can support a lot of plant material really easily. And those cracks also make for really good places for water to accumulate and store for protracted periods. And of course, everyone, yes sir?
Go ahead and finish what you're saying.
Of course, and everyone knows Tennessee's famous for caves. Limestone rock makes good spaces for pockets of water to be at. So once something finds moisture in one of these spots, they usually grow pretty well.
If you have a farm and you have cattle on it, a lot of times a good, heavy, thick Cedar Glade thicket is real good for cattle in the summer and the winter. In the summertime, it's a whole lot cooler, and the cattle will stay under them in the summer. And in the wintertime, when you have a real big snowstorm or something, they project enough height like a natural barn for your cattle to get under, so it protects the cattle in the wintertime.
Yeah, that's the great thing about large evergreen trees like old cedar can be. They'll give a lot of cover for everything throughout the year. And then don't let people ever tell you that you'll just get a ton of ticks underneath cedar and that cedar attracts ticks. The reason why you find a lot of ticks underneath the cedar is because of what he's talking about. Because not just the cows like hiding underneath there in the summer and the winter, everybody else does too. So all your deer, all your native animals that the ticks will take and get on and run around, they'll be there, so then the tick population will start accumulating, and then that way they can find easier prey. And not to mention all the tall grasses and weeds that you'll find in around these places make for really good spots for the ticks to latch on to people and critters. This is a cool little plant. We've got a lot of this over at the nursery because it just grows on top of everything. It's a, as it says, it's a little bacteria. It's a cyanobacteria. That means that it produces its food via photosynthesis, a lot like plants do. It takes, and whenever it's got lots of water, it will swell up, it'll do it all of its business, makes for a really nice gunky mess, and then as it dries out, it'll turn into this black crispy mess that you can see anywhere. And you'll find that all over Cedar Glade. You can also find it anywhere where you got large expanses of stone because it can grow on top of it real easily. Oak Hickory Forest. This is another one of our natural native biomes. Now, just because it says oak hickory does not mean that that's all that is there. You'll also find in this area lots of different pines on occasion. You'll find our native tulip poplar trees. You'll find blueberries. You'll find hydrangeas that are native here. It's just the primarily dominant species in those forests. You generally find this in upland areas where the ground can be a little bit deeper, where the plant material has helped contribute to a lot of soil nutrients. Gives a lot of cover for plants so they don't have to struggle in Tennessee sun like we do when we have to plant them. And they're just really nice places. This is also where you'll find a crud ton of deer hiding out in between different glades. Prairie, we do have a lot of prairie even here in Middle Tennessee. Large open grasslands with wildflowers in it. You find it more heavily as you get out further west. And lots of pretty wildflowers in those. So why don't people landscape with more natives? Largely it's a matter of perception. A lot of people don't know that we have a bunch of native plants here. That they can grow very easily, that there's a lot of them in cultivation. A lot of native plants look really weedy, and people don't like having weeds in their yards. I like native plants because they're really tough, and I don't mind stuff that just kind of grows in. Non-natives can be more beneficial to people's needs and wants. I mean, if you want something that's going to bloom all summer, you're usually going to wind up finding a non-native plant, because most of our native plants have very small time frames when they flower. A lot of times they're going to have different sizes. When we're talking about natives, a lot of folks will focus on flowers, but there is a whole bunch of different woody ornamentals, so shrubs and trees. One place where we do manage to use a lot of natives without a lot of work is in our tree plantings. Most of the trees that get planted around here in Middle Tennessee in newer and older homes are cultivars of native species. There's just a handful of common exceptions like the cherry trees. Differences in how you maintain them. A lot of people want to baby plants to death. It can be really easy to do. Native plants don't have to have a lot of attention. They just have to have enough to carry them through till they get settled in. They're more like owning a cat and less like owning a dog. Let's see. Covered that. Not as much development of cultivars. Now, this is one of those things where we're slowly starting to get better. A cultivar of a plant is just different varieties of that same plant. So if you've ever planted multiple different types of bush beans, you planted different cultivars of bush beans. So there's multiple different cultivars of the common purple coneflower. We're starting to get more cultivars of native plants. Like there's finally a whole bunch of different native cultivars of columbine. There's different cultivars of trillium that are coming out. One plant that's been in production for a really long time that's a native is coral bells, heuchera. There's a whole bunch of different ones of those. You just have to watch your Latin names on them. And that's something you really have to watch out for anytime you're dealing with native plants, is that Latin name. So always make sure that you have that and you're comparing it with what you're seeing on the plant tags whenever you go out shopping. Because they'll call something a coral bell and it is a heuchera, but it might not be one of our native heucheras. So you have to really watch that. So how do you utilize native plants? Well, first up, read up. The more information you got, the easier it's going to be to find them and make use of them. Lots of really good books here on this page. Of course, y'all got this handout here, that Landscaping with Native Plants from the NEPSI website. And then I love this book right here, Wildflowers in Tennessee, the Ohio Valley, and Southern Appalachians. That is an awesome book. Makes an excellent field guide because it is made of material that will not get wet and soaked and ruin on you. So you can take it out into the woods and look at stuff. Everything in that book is listed by color. So you have different sections in there based on what color you're looking at. So if you come up on a wildflower and it's red, you flip to the section that has red flowers, and then you can start flipping through those to find the one that you're looking for. The other thing I really like about that book is that it will tell you if that particular plant, because it covers all the flowering plants pretty much you'll find in our area. It tells you if that plant is native or not native, and it'll even tell you when it was introduced if it's not native, if they have information on that. So it's a really good resource. And there's multiple plants per page, so it's really, really packed with information. Familiarizing yourself with those scientific names again. The more Latin you know, the better off you'll be. And it's one of those things that every once in a while just pop out that, yeah, that's a heuchera. Or, you know, I'm looking for Lindera boson, which is that spice bush we saw earlier. They're really important because the common names get applied commonly to things. So it lines with a lot of stuff. whenever you've got a spot in the yard you don't know what to do with, I highly recommend seeing if there's a native plant that will work well for you in that area, because they are specialized to deal with all different types of environments. One of my favorite recommendations at the nursery is a nice little plant native to the southeast called dwarf Yopon holly. It's a real excellent, tough little evergreen shrub. That dwarf cultivar usually doesn't get more than 4 foot tall. They're a swamp plant natively, so that usually means that they'll handle drying out real hard. They don't mind also getting real wet. It's got good color to it, and it can tolerate being planted in between 2 slabs of concrete, which is really important. That Tenepsi website, which I've got a slide in here that showcases it, it's also got a really good list of alternative plantings. So maybe you're looking at planting a Euonymus, a lattice, which is burning bush, because it's got that nice red fall foliage. You could instead plant something like a feather bush or a sweet spire, or even our native Euonymus, it's got more shade, a strawberry bush. So this is that Tenepsi website. They're actually getting ready to change this over and do some new updating, because they haven't updated in like 5-6 years. If you go on to that Tenepsi website, there will be a little area called landscaping up there in that top hotbar. Click that, it'll pop up all their different information that they have for their various PDF publications. They have breakdowns for plantings in East, Middle, and West Tennessee. They have an overall Tennessee planting list. They have that alternatives planting list. Just lots of really good information. They update you frequently about invasive plants that have been spotted in Tennessee. You can go on there and report if you've seen an invasive plant coming in. That way you can take and keep it tracked to figure out how much it's showing up in different places. Right now, there's lots of information coming in about nandinas that are getting out into the woods because of bird droppings, because they got red berries on them. Birds like eating berries. Birds eat berries and then they go poop in the woods and we get more nandina. Similar things happen with a lot of different plants. That's how privet keeps getting around so much, because the birds eat it and they move them around, and that stuff just, it grows like wildflower. Example of that native plants handout they've got in there. This one is the one that y'all have in front of you. It's the Middle Tennessee one. So lots of good plants on there. Other excellent resources. So lots of good information over in here. All sorts of websites you can take and access. Everybody's got something. I love Missouri Botanical Garden because they do in-depth information on all the plants they have listed in there. Their plant finder is one of my favorite resources to constantly use. They even frequently have pronunciation keys on there and audio, so you can know how you're probably supposed to say what it is. Exotic Pest Plant Council, Tennessee Native Plant Society. I sometimes forget about them, unfortunately, because they don't do a lot of press information, so they slip through every once in a while. Of course, UT and the extension services and the various colleges and universities always have good information on everything. Anybody still writing down information from up here and you get a picture? Any questions or will they read a copy?
Privet, is that one of your native plants primarily, or is it brought in here from somewhere?
Privet is a non-native invasive plant. It was originally introduced for hedging and erosion control. And then it did what a lot of plants that get brought in do, and it went absolutely bonkers. It got everywhere because it's good at growing in really hard, disturbed soil. It's really good at growing in full sun. It's really good at growing in shade. So it grows everywhere, and it just keeps going. It sends down really deep root systems, so it has lots of energy. So you can go in there, you can cut it back real hard, and in 2 weeks it's back up again, and back up usually in more places than you originally cut it back from.
I don't remember it being here like 50 to 60 years ago, or as much.
Well, that's about when I think
About
my
when it
timeline
started.
Yeah. Kind of like Bradford pears. They got brought in because they're a really pretty tree and they were really quick growing and nice for landscaping. And it was something cheap people could put in to have windbreaks and whatnot. And then they weren't always not sterile. And they were also introducing a couple of other cultivars of that calorie pear besides Bradford. So then they started cross-pollinating and started going insane. And then you just get enough biomass of it, it just keeps rolling. So now we're having to deal with digging privet out and burning it out, and killing it out with the herbicides.
Hard to get rid of.
It's the shrub of it version of kudzu, in my opinion. And it grows so thick and heavy, it very quickly outcompetes the native plants. That's going again.
James, stop this crazy thing.
Oh, come on, just need you to go to the previous slide. There we go. Oh, it did slide quite far, didn't it?
There you go.
There we
That's
go.
where he's supposed to be.
Okay. So we'll take and leave that right there. But yeah, it's hard to get out of there. So finding native plants, can you dig them up? So can I dig up native plants if I see them somewhere? First answer and best answer is no. If you see a native plant, I highly recommend just leaving it there, identify it if you like it, that way you can go see if you can find it elsewhere. But there is a little series of things that you can go through. Some of them aren't protected, so you can, if there's enough of them, you feel good about it, go out there and maybe get a couple, but there's a few things to keep in mind. One, do you have permission? Do you have permission to be on that land? Do you have permission to dig that plant up? Is it rare, threatened, or endangered? A lot of them are, so that usually knocks that option off, so you can't dig those up. Is it in the blooming or fruiting stage? If it's actively flowering, it's already under stress because it's doing what it needs to secure the next generation. If you go dig it up while it's actively blooming and fruiting, that plant is going to probably die. So there's no need to take and dig it up because you won't be able to transplant it well. Is there an abundance of it? If you go out and you see Virginia bluebells taking up an area as big as this room, you're probably okay if you have permission to take and dig up a little portion of it. But you're honestly better off just getting to the seed, which is generally fairly easy to take and collect. You just have to watch the plants. Once they start flowering, they usually have seed come on about a week and a half, 2 weeks. So you can go out there and collect them. It's much easier than digging them up. Does it transplant well? For most native plants, this answer is no. A lot of them will not transplant very well. They have heavy, deep root systems. You go in there digging, you're going to knock off a lot of that deeper root mass. It's going to send them to shock, and they're probably going to die. So in general, just don't dig up native plants. Collect seeds, find cultivars that are growing and being grown in reputable nurseries. Now, all that being said, there are people who do go and dig up native plants. So how do you figure out what plants are okay for sale? First and foremost, what are they planted in? If they're in a good potting mix, they were probably grown from seed or cuttings in container mix, and they've never been dug out of a field or somebody's wooden lot. Are they selling really rare plants? Because the more rare it is, the less likely it is that they grew it from seed or cuttings. Is the plant wilted, or does it look recently dug? Do you see evidence of filled soil in a perennial plant? I make that distinction because a lot of times our native trees and shrubs, they can be planted in the field and dug later. And those you would actually find a lot of native soil on, generally nice red McMinnville clay. Don't feel bad about asking to double check where these plants came from. A lot of people will be more than happy to tell you, yeah, our plants are sustainably grown. Yeah, we got them from this local nursery. They're more than happy to share that information because if it gets out that they have good, reputable sources, they can sell more plants. And the more plants that they get to sell, the more native cultivars that get grown and made. Is it common in hard More common and hard to propagate and are slow to mature plants whenever we're talking about plants that are dug and sold essentially illegally. So always know what plant you're getting and what its characteristics are. It's like it's hard to find tupelo or sourwood or pawpaw trees because they don't grow really well whenever you're trying to field grow them or pot grow them. Good thing about pawpaw though, if you know anyone who's got a patch, just go harvest a lot of fruit in the fall. And wherever you want to start your pawpaw trees, just throw the fruit right there. All that nice fleshy fruit makes really good compost and food for the new seedlings that'll inevitably come up wherever you threw them out at. So it is getting better all the time with native plants. A lot of garden centers are starting to carry a lot of different cultivars of plants. Right here we have a pretty little tiarella, a foamy bell. Now this right here is a heucherella, I'm sorry. Heucheras and tiarellas are really closely related. So they actually interbreed really easily. So you'll wind up heucherellas, and that's even naturally occurring where there's a dense enough population of them. So that's a really good swath of nice shade to partial sun-loving plants. Our native, one of our native heucheras you'll actually find growing on rock outcroppings along rivers whenever you're floating down them. You'll see them out there. Almost all of them have a leaf very similar to this, or it's more rounded with that serration on the outside edge. They'll all have this type of flower stalk. No matter whether it's a heucherella or a tiarella, you'll have a very similar flower. And the more, of course, that we buy, the more encouraged people are to keep growing them. It's a lot like with cows and chickens. People love cows and chickens. Mostly love cows and chickens because we like to eat them. But it's a useful thing to us. It's wanted, so people keep breeding them, keep growing them, and keep making new ones and new types. We have some really good sources of native plants here in Middle Tennessee. Nashville natives and Grow Wild are two I commonly take and recommend out if you want to go actually visit a place. Those two guys can be pretty nice. They are definitely into plants, which sometimes puts little people off. I give them a call before you head out. That way they know you're coming and that they know that you're interested in getting a couple of native plants. They can even send you a list with all they have. They're real nice guys once you get to know them, but you just have to get to that stage because they really, really love their native plants, and that's what they are all about. So native plant breakdown. So there are 3 different categories of native plants, if you will. You have spring ephemerals, you have herbaceous perennials, and then you have woody ornamentals. Now the spring ephemerals, they're late winter and spring blooming plants. Herbaceous perennials, they're the ones that, there's a whole bunch of different ones of them that start blooming usually anywhere between mid-spring till the fall. And then the woody ornamentals, that's all of our larger shrubs, bushes, and trees that they'll do different things throughout the year. So spring ephemerals are really cool. They literally mean last a really small time because they come up, they grow, they flower, they seed, and then they go back to dormancy really, really fast. We're talking 6 to 8 weeks. They've grown and they're done. If you know where some of these plants are and you really want to get pictures of them, you have to check every other day or sometimes just every day to see if they're actually blooming, because a lot of times whenever they go to finish blooming, they are done and you have missed it, because a few of them will bloom just like in 2 or 3 days and they're finished because they have a lot of work to do, because a lot of these guys grow in woodland areas, so they're trying to beat the leaves on the trees because they have to get up and do all their stuff that they have to do, and then they go to sleep for the rest of the year. So you see these guys for maybe 2 months a year, and then the rest of the year they're just not there. They're in the ground, they're asleep, they're nice and they're healthy, but you just don't see them anymore. Let's see, again, lots of woodland plants. There's that Virginia bluebell I was mentioning, they're real pretty. Thick fleshy roots reserve a lot of energy and water for that long summer dormancy and winter dormancy. Vital food source for all sorts of pollinators and animals. Some of them will eat the roots. The pollinators make good use of them for early spring nectar, because these guys, we're talking blooms in February and the first parts of March. So they get up and going really, really early. They're the early bird risers in the plant world. Common spring ephemerals in Tennessee: Harlequin Flower, Bloodroot, Shooting Star, Trilliums, a whole bunch of different Trilliums. They're all really cool. They all come up like this essentially, with different patterns on the leaves, different size leaves. Some of them are taller than others, some shorter, a little bit different flower area. Let's see, show the bluebells. Jack in the Pulpit is a cool old plant that a lot of people have growing in places, just from where grandma had them in the yard. Cut leaf toothwort's a nice little one. Herbaceous, natives in spring and summer. So this is more plants that we're a lot more familiar with. We have our native Delphinium right here on the right. That is the only Delphinium I probably ever grow in Tennessee. If you can find the find it, it's going to be a lot tougher. It's not going to melt in our summer as bad as the non-natives will. Joe Pye weed, because one man's weed is another man's flower. That right there is a coneflower. Tennessinensis, our native Tennessee coneflower, is a lot like that, but the petals are usually more inflected down. So there's lots of different ones of these. You'll see them blooming throughout the entire year. They're herbaceous because they put on a lot of green growth, and all that green growth gets killed by the frost, and it dies back completely to the ground. That's what herbaceous means. Lots of little colonies that like to shift throughout areas over the course of the years. So one year you'll have a big patch of it over here, and then some years will wind up showing up way over that way. They just kind of move around as the seeds and the roots go. Lots and lots of different ones of these already in cultivation. Here are some really awesome ones. This is probably one of my favorite native plants, blue false indigo, Baptisia australis. That plant, depending on where you put it at and how happy it is, can grow anywhere from about 2 foot to 5, 6 foot tall. We have a really nice loamy spot at the nursery where we've got one planted.
So the question is, what color is it actually? Is it blue or is it indigo?
It actually ranges. They've even got yellows now.
Add yellow to the name.
Yeah. Lots of really good ones. Indian pink that I mentioned earlier is up in there. The false indigo will actually leave behind a woody stem that you'll be able to find chrysalises of different butterflies on sometimes. Especially if you have them really close to the various milkweeds, you can find monarch chrysalises on them pretty easily because they'll stand out real well on the branches. Heuchera mentioned again. Cinnamon fern, I love cinnamon fern. We have 2 really cool native ferns, and cinnamon fern is one of them. The other ones are all purple. Both of them will get about this tall, so we have a fairly big couple of ferns here in Tennessee. They're really awesome. The cinnamon fern comes up real straight and tall. It's a little bit fuzzy, and it's cinnamon colored, which is why it's got the name. The royal purple fern will come out real tall with its fiddlehead, which is what that spike of fronds is called before it leaves out. And it's more of a purple color and less fuzzy. Both of them get real good size. Yarrow, lots of different really nice cultivars of it are already in existence. They range anywhere from whites to reds, with all different sorts of pastels in between, and lots of yellows as well. If you've ever seen Queen Anne's lace, the flower on yarrow is very similar. Phlox, lots of different native phloxes, especially in the paniculata species. The garden phloxes, they're the old ones that sometimes they'll get 2 foot tall. I've seen some that are as big as I am, and they'll have nice little spires of different colored flowers on them. Even more plants, lots of Latin names in here. Beard tongue is Pentstemon. We got lots of good, cool Pentstemons here. Got black-eyed Susans. Here's some more coneflowers. Woody ornamentals. Now this is where we get a lot of really great options for landscaping that you see already in availability. We got over 100 species of native woody ornamental trees and shrubs. Many of them are year-round interests, so they'll provide something for your garden all year long. A lot of them suit really great landscaping needs. This cool tree here, anybody know what it is?
I was getting ready to ask what that was.
This right here is Staghorn sumac.
That's a pretty one.
Sure is colorful.
That's it in its fall coloration. It'll take and go into some really awesome shades of red. You'll frequently see them in small clumps out in fields. They'll take and come up and make little colonies. Characterized by a very nice frond-like leaf. It's like a bigger version of a mimosa leaf. If people come in asking for mimosa, I usually try to send them off towards this tree, especially if they're wanting that feathery leaf. There's a really awesome cultivar that we just found 3 of for sale at the nursery called Tiger Eyes. Instead of just being a flat green, it's lime green colored and like neon lime green, almost like the color of yellow there on that bag.
Does it hold its color in the summer?
Mm-hmm.
Does it?
Yep. It'll change into the red shades pretty early in the fall, and it still flowers real nicely. The reason why they're called Staghorn is not just because of the way they grow, but because the new wood on them has a felt covering on it. So it almost looks like staghorns and velvet.
To get that shape, did that take some pruning and?
Probably a little pruning,
Yeah.
but they grow like that for the most part.
Are they, even though they're native, can they be invasive?
If they really like a spot where they're at, they'll make a colony.
Okay.
Good news is they won't spread out too far from where the original plant was.
Okay.
And if they can find a spot where the seed can get dropped and get settled in, they'll start growing up there. But a benefit of native plants, which is a downfall for trying to cultivate them, is they're really susceptible to digging and that killing them out. So if you ever get them into a spot where you don't want them, just dig them up. They may transplant, they may not. They usually won't, and you don't have to worry about them in that space.
How big do they get?
6 to 8 foot tall usually, so they're not very big plants, they're fairly small. Let's see, who else is really on here that's really cool? Oak leaf hydrangea, lots of people don't think about that, but it's a native Tennessee plant. It's really cool. They've got cultivars now that are mostly red flowering, there's ones that are white flowering. They range in height from 4 to 10 feet tall and wide, so they can get quite large. Calicarpa, I can't remember the common name for it right now offhand.
Beautyberry?
Beautyberry, thank you. It's a really pretty plant. You have to be really careful with them though, because there's also an Asiatic species of beautyberry. So whenever you go to get it, make sure you're finding our native beautyberry. Short list of various awesome things. Our native silver bell, there's a Japanese variety of this that gets 20 foot tall. Our native gets like 10 foot tall, and is a much more hardy shade tree. By that I mean it likes shade, it doesn't provide shade. I mentioned earlier about a lot of our native trees being common in cultivation. Red maple is a native tree in Tennessee. You'll find them in the woods. They grow really well here. That's why a lot of people use them. Big leaf magnolia, it's a deciduous type of magnolia, so it'll drop its leaves. But the reason why it's called big leaf is that some of those leaves can be this long and this wide. And they make anywhere around a 25 to 30 foot tall tree eventually. In the woods, they tend to be really sparse and have a lot of really good branch growth to them. A lot of different oak species are native here, but again, oak hickory forests up on the uplands of our area, so that kind of lies in. Leocove, featherbush, also known as dog hobble. They're cool little plants. They like a little bit more shade. They can grow in spots where there's some moisture issues. They've got really pretty flowers on them in the early summer, and as they go through the summer into the fall, they'll take and change into reds on the leaves, and they're semi to mostly evergreen plants, so they're a good little option for planting in. Redbud are one of our first trees to bloom here in Tennessee. I use it as a good kickstart for when spring actually is trying to start, and I usually have to start reining people back in from planting until after they finish blooming at the earliest, because we'll always get cold after the redbud blooms. Eastern red cedar, A lot of people think of our native cedar as a trash tree, but there's actually a really large number of Juniperus virginiana that are cultivated for different things. As an example of the extremes it can grow in, there's one called gray owl that gets 3 foot tall, 4 foot wide. That's its mature growth size. And then there's Taylor juniper, which is another cultivar of it, that it gets 2-3 foot wide but grows 30 foot tall. Very tough trees. They have all the strength of our native red cedar, because that's what they are, but they just grow in different forms and shapes. So they're a good plant.
How many varieties of cedar are there? It's up around close to 10, 20.
In cultivation, I'd say at least that much, and it hybridizes really well with other type of junipers. So you start getting a lot of really different variations in it. Let's see. Anybody else a note on there? Now we'll move on. Native vines. Now this is really cool. I like this. This is our native honeysuckle. This is what a honeysuckle actually looks like. Not that white, yellow junk that you see growing everywhere that everyone remembers licking the syrup out of as kids. That's Japanese honeysuckle. It is the reason why you don't see a lot of this out in the woods anymore. It just overran it and took up all of its available space. Really beautiful colors on them, gorgeous leaves. Yes, ma'am.
Is that the one that has like the stem comes out and there's berries right in the middle of the?
It'll do that once
In
it
the
goes
fall.
to
Yeah, that's, I've got that.
but all of them will take and do that to an extent. But yeah, just take and always compare it. The big thing, you can actually see it here on this, are that Lonicera sempervirens. See how this leaf near the flowers is one solid leaf? There's no petiole like back in here. That's a key characteristic of our native honeysuckle, where it just has that one solid leaf around the stem. It doesn't have an actual leaf like what we normally think of. Pipe vine, there's one of those planted out here on the shed at the herb garden. Cross vine, I love cross vine. It is a wonderful semi-evergreen vine. It works really great for shading pergolas. It's got a really big bloom of flowers in the spring. It'll hit again throughout the entire summer. It'll just keep going. It can grow up to 6 foot a year or better once it gets its feet settled in the ground. So 2 or 3 of them make really quick work of covering over a pergola area. I much prefer recommending it instead of wisteria vine. Now that being said, we do have a native wisteria, American wisteria. It's a pretty plant. It blooms. It will not rip your fence or your house to shreds growing all over it. It grows slower. It doesn't grow as large and long, and it's not as habituated to coming off of root shoots all over the place. Virginia creeper, a lot of people don't think of it as a pretty native plant, but in the fall it's got really awesome red foliage color to it. It's much hardier than Boston ivy. It can actually outcompete poison ivy, because you usually find it growing in the same places, and the Virginia creeper will eventually overtake it. Some folks have a reaction to Virginia creeper like other people do to poison ivy. For some people, the Virginia creeper can counteract the oils of the poison ivy a little bit. That being said, if you're not sure about your reaction to the plants, and any plant you ever encounter that will cause a reaction on the skin, cold water and soap, and then just wash everything in vinegar afterwards. Did you have a question?
I heard that like some of the oil, like jewelweed, can get rid of like that poison ivy oil.
Yeah, jewelweed's good for poison ivy a little bit, but it's more commonly associated with stinging nettle. Jewelweed is our native impatient, and it's a favorite of hummingbirds. Does really well in the shade. It's got a little seed pod that whenever you touch it, it explodes. So it's great for kids.
Yeah, true live soap will kill poison ivy, poison oak.
They can just burn it off there with the alkalinity.
If you got true live
Yes, ma'am.
soap.
You're talking to me? Carolina jasmine, what about the hardiness of it here?
It's a little borderline. Over in the Carolinas where it's from, it's evergreen plant. Around here it tends to be more semi-evergreen, which that generally means it'll lose between 1/2 to 2/3 of its foliage over the course of the winter. Blooms real heavily first thing in the spring. There's a couple of cultivars that'll bloom again in the fall pretty heavily. Rarely does it do anything in between. But it can make a nice cover for an arbor or something. And as long as the soil drains well, it shouldn't have too many issues with cold hardiness.
Is the major wheeler honeysuckle
It's a
hybrid
cultivar.
of-
It's actually just a straight cultivar of the
Yeah,
Silver
that's one I got.
Okay, there's a honeysuckle variety, I don't know which one it is that attracts hummingbirds very well.
That one?
That's the one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, for
And it doesn't pull down your fences too, right?
unless you let it grow real heavy. I mean, it can throw out a pretty heavy mat of plant material, but it's fairly easy to control. And you don't have to worry about it like literally growing around all of your chain link and everything like that Japanese honeysuckle
It
can.
needs some
Good.
support.
One thing to watch out for it though, aphids do like getting on that new growth, so watch it in the spring real closely, especially at the growing tips. It's fairly easy to take care of the aphids though. Pull your hose over there with that nice little hand sprayer and then just turn it all the way up and just start brushing the plant, knocking the aphids out into the yard. They won't know what to do and they'll be dead in a couple of days. Let's see. Little plant this, not that. I talked earlier about some alternatives. So tree of heaven, I hate this tree. It grows really fast. It can get 15, 20 foot tall in a couple of years. And I literally mean a couple of years. It can then in the course of one season throw out millions of seeds. People like it though because it grows really fast. It's got this really nice fern type leaf to it. That Staghorn sumac I mentioned earlier is another really good alternative for it. Then there's also a larger tree form sumac that'll get 40, 60 feet tall eventually. That does really well around here. As you can see, they compare very well. Both of them can grow in pretty cruddy ground. They do fine each way. The thing you'll notice about a lot of invasive plants is that they're really good on growing on crap soil. And if anyone's dug around here in the middle of Tennessee, we have a lot of that. That being said, one thing a lot of people don't ever take into consideration about clay, if you can get nutrient material into clay, so get organic compounds in there, it holds on to it for a long time. So once you can actually get that clay penetrated with manure and compost and everything, it'll stick around for a while. It just takes a little bit of care to get it up to speed. Good old mimosa. Everyone's familiar with mimosa.
Oh, yeah.
It's a legume, much like redbud is, which they make a habit of growing in really bad places and growing on fringe locations. I like redbud much better though. I like the leaf because the heart-shaped leaf is really nice. There's lots of different cultivars of redbud. A lot of them occur naturally, so it's really easy to find them. That mutates fairly easily out in nature, so you can get a bunch of different kinds. The flower time is significantly off between these two plants. So they don't really match up in that space, but you get a lot of the same colors and other attributes. You even get the same type of seed pod. Bradford Pear, I don't even ever talk about this tree unless it's to tell people to prune it off the ground. And if you've never had the displeasure of smelling Bradford Pear in one of the years whenever it smells bad, it smells bad. I usually equate it to like week-old wet tobacco. It does not do anything for me. That being said, if you absolutely have to plant a Bradford tree, pear tree, or you have to grow it, lots of heavy pruning to try and keep it in check. Otherwise, it will be dead in 10 to 15 years. They don't have a very long lifespan because the way they grow, they break easy. Yes, sir.
If you have asthma, it's probably the worst tree to have in your yard.
Yeah, lots and lots of
Because
pollen.
asthma,
They're beautiful.
it'll key off asthma people.
Much better plant to plant out is American dogwood. I love our dogwoods. There's two really good, strong strands of breeds right now. One is Appalachian series, the other one is the Cherokee series. If you get either one of those, a plant from either one of those lines, they grow really well. They're strong plants. The key though to an extremely healthy dogwood is to plant it in morning sun up till about lunch, 1 o'clock, and then afternoon shade. If you go to put it in full sun, they will handle it, but it takes years to set them into that space. This tree right here, you can see on that trunk, it's pretty far across. It's probably at least a hand span. Dogwood grows inches a year, so that is an old tree. It's been there for a very long time. It's got very deep roots. Someone probably babied it to get it set up into that spot. If you ever see a dogwood out in the full sun, someone put a lot of love and care to keep it there, and it's an old tree. Because I've got one at my house that's in a nice shady spot. That tree has grown in the course of 8 years, maybe a foot. So we're not talking about a fast tree. Okay, I think I got a couple more slides. I talked about that strawberry bush, also known as hearts of busting. That's our American Euonymus. Much better and cooler plant than burning bush, but it does take this a little bit longer to get settled in. That's what it looks like in the fall, whenever it's putting out all of its seeds.
Does it not spread like crazy with all the seeds?
You would think, but it's a woodland shrub, so it needs fairly rich and loamy soil to really do its best. Now, if you've got a house or a yard or a woodlot that has a lot of that type of soil, it'll start spreading out a little bit quicker and it'll grow in faster. But if you're going to plant it in rougher ground, you have to take and work it up well to make sure it's healthy. Osmanthus americanus, devilwood, much better option, Chinese privet. Most of that Ligustrum chinensis you can't even get anymore. It's on the noxious weed list, so you should not be able to find any cultivars of chinensis for sale. Native honeysuckle versus Japanese. And then I'll just kind of pause this and we'll let it run through here in a second. It's 10 o'clock, so I know some people have got to go. Yes, ma'am.
Serviceberry, is that a good tree for here?
I'd recommend working it up the ground good whenever you go to put it in. Our clay's a little bit rough on it, so the more organic material you can get in for it, the better off it is. They're going to go ahead and do the drawing, and then we'll get into more questions.